but the Palestinians weren't the practitioners. And so you can't make them the victims of this. And I said, a lot of what we're seeing results from the impunity that has been granted to Israel. It can't be, can it ever be argued that because we suffered apartheid, we have a license to kill all those who were involved in our oppression? Why then were we encouraged to negotiate with those who oppressed us and to create a condition in which all of us could live peacefully side by side? Why is it all right for the apartheid practitioners and it's not acceptable for us to do that for Palestinian people? It can't. So it lies in that relationship, but also lies in the origins of our Bill of Rights, which I mentioned, of the Freedom Charter, which did impose on us the obligation of attention to human rights. I don't think we've been perfect in all regards. There have been many mistakes, like one of our votes in the UN on Myanmar. So we have made errors, but we have attempted to correct, to assert that human rights must be a lodestar of the foreign policy of South Africa. Not all our friends share that view, but we try to do so. Often, I face challenge, questions to me, that, oh, you're like this about Palestine, what about Ukraine? But it can't be one evil can be offset against another evil. And decades of occupation are not similar to an invasion now. They're both wrong, but it's not the same thing. The Palestinian people have suffered oppression for over 70 years. Something could have been done. And we're not supporting them with arms. We haven't given them anything to help them wage a freedom struggle. Most of us have given them solidarity, and the rest of us have given arms to Israel. And we must remember that. And so it's important that we assert that what we're talking about is justice, it's human rights, and it's freedom, which should be available equally to all people, no matter who they are.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about...
Good morning, Africans. I hope you are doing fine where you are, and if you're not doing fine, please do fine where you are. Let's do a video today. Many of you are going to like this video. Now, I have this question to ask you. Remember when you were a child, maybe there was a group of kids playing and you had your own group and you throw a stone at them, or one of you, not even you yourself, one of you throws a stone and it hits one of the other team members. Now they gang up and they come after the person who threw the stone. You remember, there were some of your group members who would run away, but some of you would stand strong and fight. Even in the Bible, we have the story of Gideon. God told him that, or rather, he should let those people who are afraid of fighting go home. Those who are afraid left. And then he was left with a certain number, let's say, I'm not certain. Out of these 700, he told them to go and drink. And then God told them, of those people who are going to drink, those who will drink with their heads facing the water and they are bent, those ones should go home as well. But those ones who will be drinking water, alert, looking around and checking if there is any impending danger, those ones are the ones who should fight. Those ones are the real soldiers. The first ones were cowards. These second ones, even though they had the spirit of fighting, they were unfit. The third group now, they were courageous and they were fit. There's nothing new under this world. Believe me, there's nothing new. Everything we see happening today happened before. Look at what is happening in the Palestine, in the Gaza Strip. In the countries of Palestine, we have the nation of Israel, the Arab communities, because Palestine is an Arab community. The Arab community surrounding Palestine are silent. They are very much silent, We know what goes on there. It took a country, the farthest country in Africa, towards the south. That is South Africa. They stood up and they said that whatever is happening to the Palestinians, and I don't want to call that name here, is inhuman. We shouldn't keep quiet while fellow humans are experiencing this. You know, we just have different skin colors, but we are still humans. We still have the same DNA. A man, an African man can impregnate an Arab woman and they'll give a child, which means we belong in the same species. The South African government took upon itself to go and take Netanyahu to the ICC. That was a very, very bold move by an African nation, and it has awoken the spirit of togetherness among the Arab nations. Another thing you need to understand is that some of these Arab nations have an alliance with the United States of America. They give the USA some oil, and the USA provides them with security. And so, you know, the USA is a friend of Israel. This also might be a reason why they didn't want to engage themselves with protecting Palestine. Naledi Pandor, you know, the Arab community really applauded her for her bold move, because she was the one who was spearheading this movement. And so she was brought into this interview in an Arab TV, where she was asked question that I understand, and I think we should get to understand and have a perspective of the South African Naledi Pandor and what motivated her to have this bold move to go and face Israel head on and bring an end, and try to bring an end to the Palestinian war. This is an interview that I want us to watch. Let's watch it carefully, and then by the end of this video, I shall give you my thoughts, where we shall also have a deep, critical analysis. Let's dive in.
But the Palestinians weren't the practitioners. And so you can't make them the victims of this. And I said, a lot of what we're seeing results from the impunity that has been granted to Israel. It can't be, you know, can it ever be argued that because we suffered apartheid, we have a license to kill all those who were involved in our oppression? Why then were we encouraged to negotiate with those who oppressed us and to create a condition in which all of us could live peacefully side by side? Why is it all right for the apartheid practitioners, and it's not acceptable for us to do that for Palestinian people? It can't. So it lies in that relationship, but also lies in the origins of our Bill of Rights, which I mentioned, of the Freedom Charter, which did impose on us the obligation of attention to human rights. I don't think we've been perfect in all regards. There have been many mistakes, like one of our votes in the UN on Myanmar. So we have made errors, but we have attempted to correct, to assert that human rights must be a lodestar of the foreign policy of South Africa. Not all our friends share that view, but we try to do so. Often, I face challenge, questions to me, you know, that, oh, you're like this about Palestine, what about Ukraine? You know? But it can't be one evil can be offset against another evil. And decades of occupation are not similar to an invasion now. You know, they're both wrong, but it's not the same thing. The Palestinian people have suffered oppression for over 70 years. Something could have been done. And we're not supporting them with arms. We haven't given them anything to help them wage a freedom struggle. Most of us have given them solidarity, and the rest of us have given arms to Israel. And we must remember that. And so it's important that we assert that what we're talking about is justice, it's human rights, and it's freedom, which should be available equally to all people, no matter who they are.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about South Africa's commitment to international law, international humanitarian law, human rights, the rights of its own citizens, and the attempt by South Africa to implement that domestically and internationally now. And it would be really interesting to understand, because the West portrays itself as being the person that actually has, or the state that actually has the responsibility to do that. And from an African perspective, from a South African perspective, when you look at the United Kingdom, how did you see us previously, and how do you see us now in that context of living up to and protecting international humanitarian and human rights values?
Well, sometimes I'm very disappointed because I learned many of my attitudes here in the UK. So, for example, I never thought Tony Blair would join in this Iraq thing, never. And it was a real shock to me. And what is more surprising is even after the admission by Colin Powell that there was insufficient evidence, there's been no apology, no regret expressed. So it's a disappointment because these are societies that you believe esteem the highest values of human rights. But you see that in practice, they don't. And I think it's sad for many of us who've come to believe that there are notions of freedom in countries that claim to be a leading example of the exercise of human rights and freedom. And it's very sad to discover that they're not a leading example, and that actually what is practiced is double standard, where they believe there's human rights for some and there aren't for others. Depends who you are, your color, your religion, or where you live, your geography. This is a sad statement about the world, and I think as human beings we need to correct this and play a role in correcting it. We need to engender in the world respect for all people. In South Africa, I spoke last night about this concept that we have, and if there are South Africans next to you, you'll ask them to explain it. It's very much accepted culturally. It's a word, concept called Ubuntu. Its essential meaning is I am a human being because you recognize my humanity. It means if you don't recognize me as a human being, I can't be the essence of a human being. So we really believe in this Ubuntu principle, and we try and infuse it in our community. It's very much a cultural concept for us. So if you behave in a way that is offensive to others, then we say, oh, they say, oh, now Ubuntu, you don't have Ubuntu. You know, so it's, I think it influences a lot of our conduct. And by that, I don't want to say South Africa is perfect. It's not. We've made many mistakes.
One of your goals as minister was to work with and strengthen the United Nations and its charter and its instruments and its tools. And I just want to talk a little bit about and get your view on the attacks that have happened by the United States, UK, other countries, and Israel on elements of the United Nations Secretary General himself, special rapporteurs like Francesca Albanese, and various other elements where, including peacekeepers now on the ground in Lebanon, seem to be Israel seems to be testing how far it can go in terms of actually attacking them militarily. What do you think the dangers of that is, and why do you think that this new phenomenon is developing, where even the United Nations and its officials are becoming fair game?
Well, we've been lectured often by leaders in the North about how we must respect all these institutions. Today, they're the ones disrespecting them. It's very odd. And I think that it's not for me to answer this question, because we have indicated our attachment and belief in multilateralism. It is you, the population of the West, the citizens of the West, that need to answer these questions with your votes and show governments that multilateralism is important, that the protection of international law is necessary for all humanity, and that if we destroy international law and diminish the United Nations, we are reducing protections. And we're really causing a dismal situation for the world. Because what we are doing is affirming for every leader with evil intention that you can act as you will. And we need to turn this around. And it's only through reform, I think, of the United Nations, of its mechanisms and structures, that we might begin to see change. One of the things I hope the reform discussions would include will be a discussion on peace enforcement. We don't have that capability in the UN at present. We have peace monitoring, but we don't have peace enforcement. If we had had a peace enforcement capacity, we would have had personnel that could be sent into Gaza to protect civilians. We must ensure that when we say never again, we mean never again. Nelson Mandela used never again in his introductory speech in Parliament as president-elect. We need to make never again possible.
And then going from the institution of the United Nations, South Africa is a party to the Rome Statute. It's a member of the ICC. And I'd really like to get your insight into what you think is happening or has happened at the ICC, and how you see that process has evolved, and whether you're satisfied by that or whether you think the ICC could have done more.
Well, you're really seeing a great deal of hypocrisy, because the ICC 3 years ago was the most admired institution for having issued arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin. But today, when the ICC asks for warrants against the leadership of Israel, they've become the most unpopular institution and the target of vehement insults and threats. It's a further illustration of the double standards that many of our leaders have. And they should be challenged by all of us. One of the things that I do ask all of us to begin doing is to write. I'm sure everybody in this room is literate. We should all be writing. We should all be speaking on radio programs or wherever we can. We should all be tweeting and asking millions of questions about the attitudes of our leaders, which are dishonest attitudes and practices. And we should call them to public account on their conduct. We don't do it sufficiently. But when it's an African leader, we are so active. But when it's the West, somehow they escape scrutiny. And we need to begin to question ourselves on that, because we have to stop appropriating and owning this notion that if you're in the North, somehow you have better attributes than a person of the South. It's an entire dishonesty, and we need to start dispelling that myth and calling leaders to account and calling them out when they fail on commitments they have made. Kenyatta appeared in the ICC. He was ready to go there, much as all of us on the continent were saying, don't go. We were going to pull out of the Rome Statute. South Africa had said that, and we were preparing to do so because we felt the ICC was used for certain leaders and not all who breach or are alleged to have breached international law. After much discussion in the African Union, we felt it would be an error to diminish the status of an international institution. And as South Africa, because President Mandela held the ICC as an important protection against the commission of war crimes, we decided we could not withdraw. But now, this institution is facing a real threat. And it's facing it from progressive, modern, rich states, some of which have never signed the Rome Statute. They're not even members, and yet they force it to act in interests they have.
I mean, ICC is a treaty-based organisation, so it's just by agreement by a number of states. That's all it is, unlike the United Nations, which also a charter-based organisation, but tends to be accepted as a world centre for states to discuss important matters, although Security Council and General Assembly also failing in some regards. What I wondered was, what's the danger of these institutions, these international institutions, not living up to their mandate? So the ICJ as well, the International Court of Justice, there's been, albeit the great work that South Africa's done, we saw people misinterpreting on purpose the interim measures judgment. We even saw the former judge president, in my view, completely inappropriately giving an interview and reinterpreting what was clear on a piece of paper. What do you think the danger is if this trajectory continues without accountability for what Israel does? What's the danger for us all? What's the danger for the region generally? And what's the danger for the institutions?
Well, you make the institutions irrelevant because you harm their status as a protector of human rights. You also make them institutions that act on the basis of interests of countries rather than broader interest of the humanity and the rights of all. So you take them away from the reason for which they were established. And for me, the danger is you are arming dictatorships, you are arming undemocratic governments. We need to strengthen the ICC. We need to encourage it to act without fear, favor, or prejudice. It needs to be supported. But we should ensure also that institutions don't become beholden because they don't get resources from all our countries. So we need to look at the models of the institutions we establish. Shouldn't they all be funded through the UN body rather than directly by governments? Because once you're receiving funding from a particular source, you then become, beholden to Naledi or whoever it is that is providing the funding.
That would be a good thing, by the way.
So this is something, well, I don't have money, I'm a pensioner. But, I think these are changes we need to consider because we've got to insulate institutions from negative influences insofar as is possible. And we must select individuals that can withstand being threatened and provide support to those who are threatened, to say that we appreciate the role that you're playing. Do continue. Let us know when you receive a threat. We will stand with you, and we're going to stand outside the door of the individual that's threatening you and ensure you're protected. Great. If we could show that level of credibility and support, I think we begin to build institutions.
And as these essentially controlled by global north or Western state institutions, or we're seeing now the hypocrisy in these institutions and that they've been used as imperialistic colonial tools to push forward Western governments' foreign policy objectives, and then when it's not in their own interests, or what their perceived interests are actually, they decide actually they shouldn't work in the way that they do. And then we often hear this concept of global south being promoted as an alternative or as a balancing power. And I just wanted to understand, is South Africa being a global south state and now a prominent one because of particularly what's happened with the ICJ, is this a real concept? Are there discussions amongst global south states to draw a balance to what we see happening, or are we entering into an era of a multipolar world even? What's your thoughts on that?
I'm hopeful that the South will find its feet, because I do think it's an important concept. I don't think at the moment we have a coherent South. We have very different philosophies and political ideologies, but I think it's an important concept and we need to make something of it. I'm watching BRICS as it grows with great interest, and I hope as BRICS matures that its membership will seek to differentiate themselves from the current norm. It's only in that way that you get a counterweight to the present maladies that we're experiencing in global geopolitics.
I just wanted to talk about our Foreign Secretary a little bit here, David Lammy, and our government here.
Oh, no, I don't. I really want to be able to seek asylum here. So I want to talk about through that parcel bombs. And
that makes the struggle and the actors involved in the struggle really real. Because it wasn't easy, you know, you can romanticize it looking back at what struggles are like, what revolutions are like, what the anti-apartheid movement was like. But in terms of, I'm just interested in delving a little bit more into that, in the sense that after that must have had some impact on your parents or on you as well as a 9-year-old, and the fear. Was there discussions about actually what can we do to remove ourselves from the struggle, or was it an absolute determination that it doesn't matter, this is more important?
No, I mean, we expected that your enemy would act like that, and you had to be resolute. So one of the, I think, important features of the struggle is that it had many different dimensions to it, certainly from the liberation movement side, because our organizations began for many decades with a process of petitions, believing that the state would respond in a positive fashion at some point. That changed after decades into a very different form of struggle. And this was caused by the lack of responsiveness of the state until we reached the point where we decided we had to have an armed wing. It took a number of years and many efforts at different strategies. But I think the important essence of our liberation movements is that they are always understood that you need to reflect on the moment, and should there be a necessity to address strategy, you must rework it, you must rethink it. So it was never a constant of a set of actions. There was always revision and responsiveness to different and changing circumstances and different responses of the state. So the more the state was harsh, the more determined they made us.
So clearly you have activism against oppression and apartheid in your heritage. Clearly you have that. And your father and grandfather were both involved in the treason trial. Now, of course, you were very young when that happened. But I just would like you to explain a little bit about what the treason trial was and the impact that had, not only on your family then, as far as you can understand it now, but also in your later life, in looking back at the impact that might have had on you.
Well, the organization realized that one of the things they needed to inculcate as part of the struggle was what we came to call mass mobilization and mass activism by the community. And so began the processes leading to the 1952 National Defiance Campaign, which was very well organized, very successful, mass stayaways. And it was that really began, I think, to cause the apartheid state to imagine harsher measures against the political organizations in South Africa. Following the Defiance Campaign, Z.K. Matthews, who you've mentioned, my grandfather, at a 1953 conference of the ANC in the Eastern Cape, spoke as acting president in that conference and proposed to the Congress that we should frame a freedom charter which would set out what we aspire to as the future constitutional framework of South Africa and the kinds of rights we would want to see enshrined once we were free. The conference adopted the proposal by acclamation, framed a resolution, and agreed to part of his proposal, which was one, the Freedom Charter drafting, but that the drafting must come from the people on the ground, and it's not a draft of leaders. And that what should happen post the Congress, all the membership, the leaders must be on the ground, in branches, in communities, asking them about what this Freedom Charter should consist of. So began a campaign to collect the views of the people of South Africa in all their communities. And in 1955, in June, a Congress of the People was held in Kliptown, outside Johannesburg in South Africa. And the Freedom Charter was adopted, the clauses. So after that, of course, the apartheid state defiance campaign, this proposal, then this Freedom Charter adoption. So immediately after the 55 adoption, 159 of our leaders were arrested and charged with treason for human rights.
Sounds
clauses,
familiar, what you say.
Charged with treason, and there was this massive treason trial of the 159. They were very well defended. One of the beauties of our struggle is that although we were experiencing racism, we tried to have a non-racial composition in our movement. And so our lawyers came from a range of communities in South Africa. And they argued so brilliantly, and the state was so useless in presenting evidence that would signal treason. And in fact, often, by way of presenting evidence, lawyers would almost direct the comment toward the judge and say, surely, if your rights are infringed in this way, Your Honor, surely you would respond that there's been no violence. All we are talking of is human rights. You agree on human rights, don't you?
Yeah.
In the end, all 159 were acquitted.
Excellent. I just want to bring you back to you mentioning that you move your strategy according to the requirement needed, and the issue about an armed wing, for example. And you can draw some parallels. We'll talk about the Palestine-Israel issue shortly, but you can bring that parallel to what's happening in Gaza, West Bank and East Jerusalem, and the wide region of Lebanon now as well. But the way that the West frames these things when the ANC considered this to be a legitimate part of the struggle is they labelled it as terrorism. And I just want to understand what impact that had domestically in the struggle, in the people that were from South Africa, and whether it was noted, whether it was noticed, whether it had any impact, or whether it was just something that just came as part of the struggle and people just carried on with what they needed to do.
Well, in South Africa, the liberation movements were always very close to the people. They were on the ground. And even though we had many of our leaders in exile, we had structures in country, and we had a very robust underground movement. So there are a range of features of organization that are very different from what exists in Palestine, and it may be a result of a much more deadly context of Israeli apartheid, which is hugely violent. Apartheid was violent, but the Israeli violence, I think, really is not available as evidence in history. Some of the worst excesses are being practiced. But let me just point out something, and I know I become very unpopular when I say this, because it's very nice to be a grand revolutionary. But with our struggle, one of the things our leaders tried to do was to avoid harm to civilians, because we always wanted to have the mass support. It was very important. And the leadership realized that if you begin to, in the course of struggle, harm your civilian population, the community looks at you in a different way, and real concerns start to emerge. And so they were very clear that our armed struggle would target the state, would target state institutions, would target individuals working within the state, but would seek to avoid civilians who have no association with those institutions. So they may very well feel the absence of a telegraph pole as civilians, but they would not be the target. We did have some organizations that directly targeted, community members, ordinary residents. And if you were to assess their popularity today, you would see that they didn't enjoy the level of support that I think they anticipated they would.
Yeah, and I mean...
So this is something that's very important. I've had quarrels with it with some of my friends because they believe that actually you should go all out, kill everybody. It doesn't work. You lose the people. And that's something that you need to be very, very careful about. I'm not saying...
There is something I want us to agree on, that this woman is a woman who has experienced some difficulties during her childhood. You can clearly see that her parents were not living in one country. They were living in separate countries, and through this she learned that her country, South Africa, where she was born, there was a lot of suffering, there was a lot of difficulties. Some of you who may not know, but I guess all of you know this, South Africa is very unique among other African countries. South Africans, we have different countries which colonized it. We have the Afrikaners. The Afrikaners is a category of the Dutch people from Netherlands who came there to refresh themselves. They were exploring the world and they found the Cape of Good Hope, and then they decided to move to the mainland, South Africa. And so they came here in South Africa as refreshers, as people came to refresh themselves. I don't know what was there to refresh themselves with, but that is what the history books tell us. And after this, we have the British. We have the British who came all the way from the Great Britain to South Africa. In the books, it is written that Britain colonized South Africa, which is true, but technically what's there is that South Africa was colonized by two powers. These two powers merged themselves into what was called South African British Company, SABC. South Africa British Company is a company that was responsible for colonizing South Africa on behalf of the British, if you understand that. And also in East Africa, we have the East Africa Imperial British Company. I think it was South Africa Imperial British Company, East Africa Imperial British Company, and we also had one in West Africa Imperial British Company, such a thing. Now, one thing about Naledi Pandor is that I love her admiration, I love her way of thinking, I love her openness, you understand? Now, she's telling us that her struggles is what has made her to be what she is today. Naledi Pandor is a woman, and she's not just a woman, she's a man at heart. She has the heart of a lion. She speaks out, she understands how the mechanics of human rights, she understands the mechanics of human relations, she understands morality, which I highly value. She understands all this, and we can accredit this to her upbringing. Now, here is some of the points that I realized she made. She studied in London, and she understood the ways of the white man. It's funny that many of the older African leaders' generation, many of them studied in the West. They studied in the West. I think most likely we didn't have universities in Africa back then. We only had a few universities, like the University of Makerere, which was very popular. It has educated many African leaders. We had the University of Nairobi, which was called the Royal Queen College. Back then, University of Nairobi was called the Royal Queen College. Funnily enough, after Africans got their independence, they decided to change that name to University of Nairobi and decided to take away everything that was white and to keep everything that was African. Now, Naledi Pandor also had an earlier knowledge of apartheid in South Africa. Her parents, even though they were traveling, her parents would tell her that, back there, back home, that is the place where we belong. These are our people. She was taught songs, she was taught folklores, she was enlightened on the way of their living, She was always reminded this is not their country, and she was also told that admire and respect these people, but remember you don't belong here. You know, many of us as parents, some of us may want our children to learn foreign languages. We may want our children to learn English, be fluent in French maybe, but when our children are not fluent in this, but they are fluent in mother tongue, we can say that our children are not intelligent. No. These languages that we speak, English, French, Portuguese, Spanish, what. I don't care how fluent you are in these languages. That one who is fluent in Swahili is as intelligent as you who is fluent in English or French. No language is greater than the other. A language will serve a purpose, and its purpose is not greater than, does not make it greater than another language. Because languages die. Latin was a very big language, but it died. The English you speak today is not the English as it was before. It died. So no language is bigger than the other. And if there's a language is bigger than the other, then we should go back to the mother languages. We should go back there, up. Even today we have languages that are going to die. English is always constantly evolving with the shortening of words. So whoever is refusing to accept the African language that he or she speaks and throws it away, they don't even want to associate themselves, they don't want to teach themselves. Naledi Pandor is here to tell you that you're wrong, appreciate your values, understand your values. It starts with simple things as language, the food, the clothing. Despite where you are, you'll always be black, and you'll always be a member of a certain country among the 54 countries that we have. Now, another thing that Naledi Pandor said that highly resonated with me is the part where she said they were living in Lesotho. Lesotho is a small country within South Africa, a country within South Africa, a country within a country, Lesotho. Very beautiful. The only country in Africa that experiences snowfall. Lesotho is very, very magnificent and very, very beautiful. Yes, so she said that at one time, her father was going for work, and then as he was starting the car, a neighbor saw that there was something under the car and alerted him, and when he went to see, he found that it was a bomb, you know. It happens that people who are working for the government were targeting those people who are working for the anti-apartheid organization, because we had the anti-apartheid organizations, you understand? So they were bringing parcel bombs. They deliver bombs to your home. Imagine how many lives these parcel bombs took away. Just imagine. This hatred that a human has, a lot of it, that they can go to the extent of killing. How much hate is that? How much is that? It's a lot of hate. It's a lot of hate. It's a lot. So she says that she learned hate from this behavior. She was not born to hate. She was not born that, no, she was not born with hate. It's not inherent. Hating is not inherent. What is inherent is love. Even a baby smiles. A baby meets another baby, they smile. They don't frown on one another. No. Hate is what we learn from one another. Even racism. Nobody is born a racist. People are made racist. You understand? People are made racist because the whole backbone of apartheid was racism. If you dissect it, if you dissect everything about apartheid, it was racism. It was racism that was operating to oppress Africans. You understand? But now hatred that was learned by Naledi Pandor, she understood, okay, we have hate, and this hate has magnitudes, and the highest magnitude it can take is the taking away of human life, which is true. The highest form of hate is taking away human life or lives. That is the highest form hate can take. We don't need to get there as human beings. We just need to learn. We learn things from the environment. If you can detach yourself from an environment that makes you learn bad habits, please do. If you're struggling with alcohol, Stop living next to a bar. If you're struggling with fornication, stop visiting apps. If you're struggling with corn, stop visiting those sites. You understand? If you're struggling with diabetes, stop living next to a shop that sells candy. That is what people should be doing. It takes all dimensions of life and all aspects of life. Now, she also called on the concept of unity in times of difficulty. You know, those freedom fighters that she spoke about, they were brought together. After being brought together, they were branded, what is the name? People who go against the government. There's a name for it, you know? People who go against their own government. And then their lawyers came up front. Their lawyers gave a nice and powerful argument against the state, and these people won against the state. They won on the idea that they were fighting for human rights. And another thing that Naledi Pandor said, as long as the civilians are not touched, you have them on your side. You know, you don't want to touch those people who are not responsible for your suffering. You know, if it is that your hand is what makes you sin, cut away the hand, leave the leg. It's until the leg makes you to sin, cut away the leg. You understand? This is how it goes. Many times you find that even during Kenya during the protests, the youths, I myself included, people were peacefully protesting. But you saw what the police were doing to the civilians. You saw like almost 100 people died in these protests that we had in Kenya. Almost 100 people. After that, we had people missing and abductions everywhere. What is the meaning of this? Tell me, what is the meaning of this? The meaning of this is that the government does not know how to separate the civilians from the people who they should really targeting. You can't target a youth with a stone and you have an automatic rifle. You can't be doing that. It's until this other person is given an automatic rifle is when you have equal rights to balance. But don't carry knives in a gunfight. Don't do that. And if somebody is carrying a knife, don't carry your gun. Be fair. You know? Now, she also said about the role of the international community in bringing an end to apartheid, you know? The role of international community like the UN, the Red Cross, we have the IMF, we have the World Bank. All these organizations, they came together and they struck a deal against apartheid. The UN Security Council was against apartheid, and this saw an end to apartheid. Also, Naledi Pandor stated the role of she stated the role of the trade unions, the role of the civil society, the role of the church, the role of the youths, the role of education. These all organizations came together to fight the common enemy. The common enemy was apartheid. Apartheid had to be dealt with accordingly and categorically. And this is what had happened in South Africa. You know, when we have togetherness, we have unity, we see victory. You know? When we have togetherness, we have unity, we see victory. But when we don't have togetherness, we don't have unity, we see downfall, we see defeat. Not anyone wants to get defeated. We want to survive, and survival means winning. You understand? This was the role of the demonstrations. The demonstrations saw an end to apartheid. The demonstrations such as the ones which have been showed even on the movies such as Sarafina. We see that girl Sarafina who sings very beautifully. She comes up front and she confronts the white supremacists who are oppressing the black people in South Africa. You know, these are students. The movie tries to show us the role of the civil societies on the education sector, how students took part in the liberation of South Africa against apartheid. Yes, Guys, there's so much you can do about this video. So much. But I think I have highlighted the key points. We've had a critical analysis. And I think that if you get value in what I do, kindly do subscribe to the channel. It helps me bring you beautiful, good content. This is EFK Original Documentaries, and see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.